The story of the city of headless people, taken from Arabian Nights or 1001 Nights. The character Abu Hassan, one day, while roaming from places to place, arrived at a new city. After arriving at the city, Abu Hassan notices a strange thing about this new town. He sees that the people who are walking past him on the road, the people around the town, most of them are headless. Therefore, the story is called the city of the headless people. Abu Hassan is quite confused by seeing so many bodies walking on the road without any heads. After walking on the roads of the city for some time, Abu Hassan meets an old man who fortunately has a head. Abu Hassan starts talking with this old man. He asks this old man this question: why there are so many headless people in this town? The old man says that probably Abu Hassan is quite new to this place. Then the old man goes on to explain the reason why the city has so many headless people. The old man says that the king of the town has kept two snakes as his pets. The king has two pet snakes in his palace, and those two snakes always remain on both the sides of the king. And every morning, two heads are served to these two snakes, and therefore, every morning, two of the people of the town lose their heads, and those heads are served to the snakes of the king. And therefore, the person who has head that day, the next day, the person may not have his head, and therefore, so many headless people walk around in that town. Abu Hassan asks the old man how it is decided whose head has to be served to the snakes next day. The old man answers that every morning outside the king's palace a lottery takes place, and in that lottery two chits of papers, two pieces of papers are picked, and whosoever's names appear on those two papers, their heads are cut and are served to those two snakes whom the kings love so much. The next morning, Abu Hassan arrives at the place of the lottery. Many other people have also gathered there. The lottery takes place, and two pieces of papers are picked. But that day, something miraculous has happened. The people of the town are quite astonished, quite surprised, and also quite sad by looking at the names which are there on those two pieces of papers. Because the names of the two chief advisors of the king have appeared on those two pieces of papers. According to the rule of the lottery, now the heads of the two chief advisors of the king have to be cut, and they have to be served to those two snakes. But people are afraid of cutting the heads of the two chief advisors of the king. They first go to the king and inform him about this complex situation. But the king gives his judgment without any delay. The king says, rule is rule. Whosoever's name is there on those pieces of papers, their heads are to be cut, and to be served to those two snakes whom the king loves so much. Therefore, the two chief advisors of the king, the king's two chief advisors' heads are cut, and those two heads are served to those two snakes on dishes. Seeing those two heads, both the snakes approach the two heads with wide mouths. But before they just swallow, they would swallow those two heads, they just stop. They stop for some time, and with a violent shake of their heads, they struck the heads down from those two plates. They throw the heads down from those two plates. They reject those two heads. The king immediately gets very angry. He accuses of the people of mixing something with the heads. Therefore, the snakes are not ready to swallow those two heads. He immediately threatens punishment, and he says, whoever has done this mistake of mixing something with those two heads, that person would be punished. But the man whose duty has been to serve the heads to the snakes, he claims that he has not mixed anything with the heads. He has done the same thing which he has been doing over the months. The king gets curious. Then if nothing is mixed with the heads, why the snakes are not ready to swallow those two heads that day? They immediately ask his other advisors. There are other advisors of the king. They immediately ask his other advisors to examine the heads. The king, that means, has many advisors. There has been two chief advisors, and there have been other advisors. We know who an advisor is. An advisor is a person who advises, who guides the king. And whenever the king finds himself in problem, he first consults with the advisor, and he would first go to the chief advisor. We know the chief advisors would often go very near to the king and whisper something to the king. Whenever the chief advisors would feel that the king requires some advice, the chief advisor would give the advice to the king, even if the king does not ask for that advice. The chief advisors would sometimes play the role of the king in the absence of the king, and sometimes the chief advisors sometimes play the role of the king even in the presence of the king, and the king happily allows them to play the role of the king in his own presence, because the king wants to humiliate his subjects, and the king does this humiliation by allowing his chief advisors to play the role of the king for a small amount of time, for a short period of time. And therefore, at that moment, the subjects have to follow the order of the chief advisors, and while the king smiles. So, the other advisors are asked to now examine the two heads of the chief advisors. What is there in those two heads of the chief advisors? The two snakes are not ready to swallow those two heads. After a thorough examination of the heads of the two chief advisors, the other advisors find that inside the heads of the two chief advisors there are no brains. Those two were brainless heads, and probably because of this, the two snakes are not ready to swallow those two heads. In other words, probably those two snakes always want heads with brain, and since the heads of the chief advisors do not contain any brain, the snakes reject those two heads, and people in the town then come to know about what kind of heads the two snakes want. The story ends there, but the author leaves the story for open to interpretation. The two snakes always stay on both the sides of the king, but the two snakes would never do any harm to the king. The two snakes has never tried also even to swallow the head of the king. Thank you.